There is one specific stage in a trading career where more people quit than any other, and it isn't the stage you think. It's not the first blown account. It's not the humiliating losing streak. It happens after you finally start getting good, and it happens in almost total silence. Most people assume the hardest part of trading is technical, learning to read price action, understanding risk, surviving the losses. That's hard, but it's not the part that ends careers. The part that ends careers happens later, quietly, in a stage most traders can't even name because nobody's ever pointed at it directly. I'm going to name it today, walk you through exactly what it feels like from the inside, and tell you what actually gets people through it. Because the honest answer isn't motivational, and it isn't going to sound like anything you've heard in a trading video before. Let's talk about Renata, because her story maps this stage better than any framework I could build from scratch. Renata spent 6 years as a high school physics teacher before trading became her full-time work. When she started, she did what almost everyone does. She joined a community, a Discord server with about 400 active members, all learning the same strategy, all posting their trades, all celebrating wins and commiserating over losses together in a shared channel that never really went quiet. For the first 18 months, that community was the entire emotional infrastructure of her trading life. She had people to text when a trade went well. She had people to vent to when it didn't. The losses hurt less because they were witnessed, shared, absorbed by a group instead of carried alone. Here's the part nobody tells you about that stage, and it matters because it's not a criticism of community trading, which genuinely helps a lot of people survive the first year. The support that community provides is real, but it comes with a hidden cost that doesn't show up until much later. Your emotional regulation becomes dependent on external witnesses. You start needing someone to see the trade to make the outcome feel processed. A win that nobody sees feels smaller. A loss that nobody validates feels heavier. This works fine as long as you stay inside the community. It becomes a problem the moment you start to outgrow it. Because outgrowing a trading community usually means your process has started to diverge from the group's process, and divergence, even productive divergence, tends to get you quietly pushed toward the edges of the group rather than celebrated for it. It's worth being specific about what that community actually gave her, because the cost only makes sense once you understand the benefit clearly. In her first year, Renata took several trades that would have shaken her badly if she'd been alone. A string of 5 straight losses in her 3rd month, a single bad trade that wiped out 3 weeks of gains in month 7. Both times, the community absorbed the impact. People had seen worse. People reassured her the strategy was still sound, that this was just variance, that everyone goes through stretches like this. That reassurance wasn't false, and it genuinely kept her in the game during a period when a solitary trader might have quit outright. This is why it's so hard to identify the exact moment the same structure that saved you starts working against you. Nothing about the community changed. Renata changed, and the mismatch between her new pace and the group's unchanged rhythm is what eventually produced the quiet drift she didn't see coming. This is where the loneliest stage actually begins, and it's worth being precise about the timing because the timing is exactly why it catches people off guard. It doesn't happen when you're struggling. Nobody abandons you for struggling. Struggling is relatable, and the community rallies around it. It happens when you start succeeding in a way that no longer matches the group's habits. Renata's turning point came around month 20 when she started taking dramatically fewer trades than everyone else in her server. The group traded constantly, multiple setups a day, constant activity in the channel, a kind of shared adrenaline that kept everyone engaged. Renata's process had evolved toward almost the opposite. Fewer trades, longer holds, long stretches of doing nothing at all. She started posting less, not because she was hiding losses, but because there was simply less to post. A quiet week doesn't generate conversation. A quiet month generates even less. What happened next is the part that surprised her most. The community didn't turn against her. Nothing dramatic occurred. It was smaller and colder than that. The engagement just quietly thinned. Fewer replies to her posts. Fewer check-ins. Not out of malice. The group was still busy trading actively, generating the kind of content that sustains a shared channel, and her sparse, quiet activity simply had less to respond to. She wasn't excommunicated. She drifted out of relevance to a group whose entire rhythm was built around a pace she no longer matched. This is the moment I want you to really sit with, because it's the actual definition of the loneliest stage in trading. It's not the isolation of being new and friendless. It's the isolation of having outgrown the people who got you through the beginning. At the exact moment you most need to trust decisions that look, from the outside, like doing less, waiting more, and having nothing exciting to share. You've become competent enough that your process doesn't generate the kind of content or conversation that community life runs on. But you haven't yet built enough internal confidence to be completely fine without that external validation. You're stranded between two identities, not a beginner anymore, who gets support by default. Not yet someone who's fully self-sufficient who doesn't need it. Just a person sitting quietly with a process nobody around you fully understands anymore, wondering if the quiet means something is wrong. Renata described the specific texture of this period in a way I haven't heard from anyone else, and I think it's worth repeating almost exactly as she said it. She said the hardest part wasn't the losses during this stretch, because her losses had actually gotten smaller and less frequent as her process improved. The hardest part was that her wins had also gotten quieter. And quiet wins, it turns out, are strangely harder to sit with alone than loud losses are to sit with in a group. A loud loss gives you somewhere to put the feeling. You post it, someone responds, the feeling gets processed and released. A quiet win just sits there, undiscussed. And some part of her kept waiting for a reaction that never arrived, because there was no longer an audience built for the pace she was now operating at. I want to name 4 specific things that happen inside this stage, because if you're in it right now, or heading toward it, recognizing these will save you real time. The first is what I'll call proof withdrawal. For a long stretch, your sense of whether you're doing well has come from outside confirmation, a community's reaction, a mentor's approval, engagement on a post. When your process moves ahead of the group's pace, that external proof dries up almost overnight, and your nervous system, which had quietly outsourced the job of validating your progress, suddenly has no supplier. This creates a specific kind of anxiety that has nothing to do with your actual results. Your results might be the best they've ever been. The anxiety shows up anyway, because it was never really about the results. It was about the absence of a witness. The second is what I'll call relevance drift, which is the social mechanism behind what happened to Renata in her Discord server. Groups organize around shared pace and shared content. When your behavior stops generating the kind of material the group trades in, frequent posts, visible activity, shared excitement, you don't get pushed out. You simply become less central to the conversation, gradually, without anyone deciding it. This feels a lot like rejected, even though nobody rejected anything. It's closer to a slow current, pulling you toward the edge of a pool that never changed its own shape. The third is what I'll call the doubt inversion. Early in trading, doubt shows up as, am I good enough to do this? In the loneliest stage, doubt inverts into something stranger. Am I doing something wrong by doing less? When everyone around you is active and you're not, your brain interprets the absence of activity as a possible failure rather than as the actual evidence of progress it usually is. Renata told me she caught herself, more than once, manufacturing a reason to take a marginal trade just to have something to show, purely to quiet the feeling that inactivity meant she'd stalled. She recognized the impulse and didn't act on most of it, but she said the pull toward manufactured activity, just to have proof of effort, was stronger during this stage than at almost any other point in her development. The fourth is what I'll call premature graduation anxiety. This one is subtle and almost nobody names it. You start to suspect that maybe you've actually figured something out, that your quieter, slower process might genuinely be working. And instead of relief, this produces dread, because believing it means you might be wrong, publicly, without a group to soften the landing if you are. It's safer, emotionally, to remain uncertain inside a group than to declare confidence alone and be wrong by yourself. So, some part of you resists claiming the progress you've actually made, because claiming it removes your last excuse for staying inside a community that no longer quite fits. Renata noticed this in herself directly. She kept describing her results to herself in hedged, uncertain language. Seems to be working so far. Might just be luck. Long after the honest data in her own ledger no longer supported that level of doubt. The hedging wasn't humility. It was a way of avoiding the responsibility that comes with admitting, even just to herself, that she'd actually figured something out. Here's what actually gets someone through this stage, and I want to be honest that it's not exciting and it's definitely not the answer this genre of content usually gives you. The first shift is replacing external proof with a private, structured record of your own. Not a public post, not something built for an audience. A simple, consistent log. What you did, why, what happened. That exists purely so that you, and only you, can see the pattern of your own progress without needing anyone else to confirm it. Renata started keeping what she called a solitary ledger around month 22, roughly 2 months into the loneliest stretch. Nobody else has ever read it. The entire function of the ledger is to give her nervous system a witness that doesn't depend on anyone else's schedule, mood, or attention. It sounds almost too small to matter. It was, by her account, the single thing that got her through this stage more than anything else. The second shift is deliberately seeking out people who are 1 or 2 stages further along than you, even if there are very few of them, rather than staying inside a group organized around your old pace. This isn't about finding a louder community. It's often about finding just 1 or 2 people, sometimes only online, sometimes only met occasionally, whose process resembles where you're heading rather than where you've been. Renata found exactly one other trader during this period whose approach matched her new pace closely enough to talk to honestly. And she said, one honest conversation with that single person did more for her confidence than the 400-person server ever had, because the conversation was calibrated to the actual stage she was in rather than the stage she'd already left. The third shift is learning to treat the discomfort of relevance drift as information rather than as a verdict. When you notice a community's energy no longer matches your process, that's not proof you're doing something wrong. It's evidence your process has changed enough that it no longer fits the group it was built inside. This is uncomfortable, but it's actually a marker of progress being misread as a marker of failure. And learning to correctly label that discomfort, this is drift, not danger, removes a huge amount of the unnecessary suffering during this stage. The fourth shift is the hardest one to describe, because it's less a technique and more a kind of quiet acceptance. You have to become willing to be right, alone, without anyone available to confirm it in real time. This is genuinely uncomfortable in a way that no journaling habit fully resolves. Renata described a period of roughly 4 months where she was fairly confident her new process was working, and had almost nobody to say that to, because saying it out loud to her old community would have sounded like bragging, or worse, like abandoning them. She had to sit with being quietly, privately correct without the reassurance of an audience agreeing with her in the moment. She told me this was the closest thing to actual maturity she experienced in her entire trading career, and it had nothing to do with charts. There's a fifth shift underneath the other 4, and it's less a practical technique than a change in what you're measuring progress against in the first place. Most trading communities, without meaning to, train you to measure your standing against the room, how active you are compared to everyone else, how much you're posting, how visible your effort looks next to other people's effort. The loneliest stage forces a switch to measuring against your own prior self instead, across a much longer timescale than a group channel ever operates on. A community measures you week to week, sometimes day to day, your own honest progress, especially once your process has slowed down and matured, often only becomes visible in 3, 6, or 12-month windows. Learning to accept a measurement timescale that long, after months or years of getting feedback on a much faster clock, is its own kind of discipline, separate from anything to do with entries or exits. I think it's worth pausing on why this particular stage gets so little airtime in trading content generally, because it's not an accident. Content about losing streaks performs well because struggle is universally relatable and easy to dramatize. Content about huge wins performs well for obvious reasons. Content about the quiet, undramatic middle stretch, where someone is getting better but has nothing exciting to show for it, doesn't perform well at all, because there's no clean narrative arc to hang a video on. Nobody creates a highlight reel out of "I traded less this month and felt slightly uneasy about it, and nothing bad happened." That means the traders going through this stage rarely see anyone naming it, which means most people assume the discomfort is unique to them, a personal deficiency rather than a predictable, well-worn stage that a huge number of traders pass through in near total silence. Part of the reason this stage feels so isolating isn't just the social mechanics inside a specific community, it's that the entire content ecosystem around trading has almost nothing built for people going through it, because it doesn't generate the kind of material that gets watched. I think it's worth saying plainly why this stage matters so much, and why so many traders never get past it. Most people don't quit trading during the losing streaks. Losing streaks are dramatic, and drama, strangely, sustains motivation. There's a villain to defeat, a comeback to stage, a story worth telling. The loneliest stage offers none of that. There's no dramatic loss to rally against. There's just a long, undramatic stretch of doing less, saying less, and feeling strangely worse despite objectively improving results. Traders quit here not because they're failing, but because succeeding quietly, without witnesses, turns out to be one of the least naturally rewarding experiences a human being can have, even when it's the exact thing that's supposed to happen next. Renata is on the other side of this now. She still trades the quiet, low-frequency process she developed during that stretch. She occasionally talks to newer traders going through the earlier stages, and she told me she's careful about one thing specifically. She never tells them the hardest part is still ahead of them, back when they're deep in the losing streak stage and struggling to survive week to week. She waits until they're actually approaching it, usually somewhere around the point where their own process starts to diverge from whatever group got them started, and only then does she name it for them directly. Not to scare them, but because she wishes, more than anything else in her trading career, that someone had simply told her what this stage was called while she was standing inside it, confused about why getting better felt so much worse than getting worse ever had. She also told me something that stuck with me more than anything else in our conversation. She said that in hindsight, the loneliest stage wasn't actually about trading at all. Not really. It was the first time in her adult life she'd had to sit with genuine uncertainty about her own competence for an extended period, without a group nearby to settle the question for her. One way or the other. Teaching hadn't required that. School had never really required that, not in the same way. Trading was the first arena where she had to build from scratch an internal sense of whether she was doing well, because the external signals she'd relied on her whole life had simply stopped being available at exactly the moment she needed them most. She said she suspects this is true for a lot of people who quit during this stage, and that it probably has very little to do with markets, and everything to do with never having practiced trusting themselves without an audience before. That reframes the whole stage, and I think it's worth ending on. If you're in this stretch right now, or you recognize it from your own past, it's tempting to treat it as a trading problem. A question of whether your strategy is actually working, whether you should go back to being more active, whether the quiet means you've stalled. It's almost never really about the strategy. The strategy, more often than not, is fine, sometimes better than fine. What's actually being tested is something much older and much more personal. Whether you can hold a private, unwitnessed belief about yourself steady enough, for long enough, to let it become true without anyone else's help. So if you're in a phase right now where your trading has quietly gotten better, and it somehow feels lonelier than the losing streaks ever did, I want you to hear this clearly. That's not a sign you're doing something wrong. That's the actual shape of this specific stage, and it has a name now, and naming it is most of what makes it survivable. You're not failing at trading. You're just standing in the one place almost nobody describes accurately, between a community you've outgrown and a confidence you haven't finished building, and the only way through it is the same thing that got Renata through it. A private record only you read.